This series of videos introduces the 38 chapters of the Routledge Handbook of Environmental Movements. It's a project of the Social Change Lab, and we gratefully acknowledge the support of the Mary Lee bequest for the work of our team.
Hi, everyone. My name is Winifred Lewis. I'm a professor in the School of Psychology at the University of Queensland.
Hey guys, I'm Austin Manchadi. I'm a research assistant on the project.
Hi everyone, I'm Yuqi Liu, a UQ psychology student.
And what we're doing is we're making videos of introductions to the chapter for the Routledge Handbook of Environmental Movements. And this video is about chapter 36, which is called Green Democracy, Political Imaginaries of Environmental Movements. And it's by Amanda Machin. And I'm imagining that most of you, like me, when I read that, are not actually aware of what imaginaries is in this context. And it turns out that it's a term borrowed from Charles Taylor about loose worldviews that people might have that define how they approach abstract concepts like democracy. So our imaginary of democracy is kind of what we think is in democracy. And this title, Green Democracies, is about how environmental movements understand what green democracies are. I'll just mention before we get into it that Amanda Machin is a scholar. I'm just going to a scholar at the PPE Institute, which stands for Philosophy, Politics, and Economics Institute for Social and Institutional Change at the University of Witten/Herdecke. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. And that's a scholar of environmental politics, and she works on social sustainability, transformation, and transition. So we're looking at a chapter where she grounds the analysis in 3 different environmental movements. Can you tell us a bit about those movements, Austin?
Yeah, so the first one she mentioned was called Earth First, which is about 4 decades old. It was founded in the USA around 1980. Their main slogan is "No compromise in defense of Mother Earth." However, they were labeled eco-terrorists and used tactics like sabotage and monkey wrenching. Opposite to that, there's another one called Extinction Rebellion, which is only a few, 2, 3, 4, 5 years old, and it's a bit of a grassroots activity movement. So they ask the government to tell the truth and act to reduce carbon emissions and create a citizens' assembly. So it was formed in the UK, and they're now in, I think, 45 countries with about 650 groups globally. Finally, there's Fridays for Future, which has begun as a school strike, basically undertaken by Greta Thunberg. However, it's said that it promoted climate change into the political agenda, which has made things a bit more complicated. Now, while the 3 movements are somewhat different, they're connected by various themes and imaginaries, as Winifred said before. And there's 6 interconnected dimensions that are key to sort of reimagining democracy. The first one is decentralization, isn't it, Yuki?
Yes. And for the decentralization, so that just simply means that all the decisions about the environmental protections from the central government moved to the local communities. And by this transformation of the power, so everyone in that community could be enriched, and understanding their behaviors are really important to protect these environments. And just like you said before, these 3 movements also got their different views about what the people should do in their locally. And for example, the Extinction Rebellion movement has preferred of making group decisions that to help to judge everything that can be both combine the high government level, but also the grassroots, what they describe means just the people in the community to working together to get our cooperation for the environment protections.
Yeah, and that kind of ties into the next theme, which is inclusion. What does Amanda Machin mean by that, Austin?
Well, from what I took away from the chapter, it's a lot of basically the expansion of opportunities to participate in democratic discussion and decision making. So it's it's basically, it's an attempt to employ more people and really try and reach a more democratic version rather than just a select few people making decisions. And they particularly aim to include like things that have been excluded in the past, like non-human nature and future generations, for instance, younger people, as part of the demonstrations, which then leads into the next point, which is participation, which I'll hand over to you, Winifred, to talk about.
Yeah, that's right. So the participation question, when you think of future generations, you might think, how on earth can they participate in a present day democracy? And part of the answer to that some movements propose is by having people that are empowered to speak for them and to consider their interests. So in the same way that we take into account community members in the present when we have planning and development rules for the environment, we might have a spokesperson who's going to talk about how this is going to impact on future generations. And the participation as well can be at all levels of government, but also in everyday life, that there would be democratic participation in the environment movement. And so a lot of the times, many of the movements really oppose hierarchy and invite this kind of citizens assembly or group decision making where different people have a voice. The next theme is protest, Yuki. What do they talk about here?
Yeah, I think like they talk about is the green democracy, like sort of different with the traditional liberal democracy, is that people would have some kind of protest behaviors. It's different with revolution, but it's still like a huge group of masses to speak for their voice, and in their protests, like people, like for example, is that Rebellion or
Extinction Rebellion? Yeah.
The Extinction Rebellion, like they prefer that something that like the not violent ones, like compare with the like the oldest one, the EF, like they prefer use the violent and radical measures to stop the environment change. But for the XR, and they just prefer to use the non-violent and persuade the policymakers to make some right decisions to protect their environment.
That's right. Getting some feedback, Yuki, but just to add in there that one of the things that they will refer to is direct protest versus conventional protest. And those direct forms of protest can be disruptive, even though they're nonviolent. So Extinction Rebellion, for example, they often stop traffic and so on. And so there's a tradition of engaging in that public protest to draw attention to a cause and to try and pressure policymakers. And then there's then there's a theme of passion, which I guess goes with that, Austin?
Yeah, it's pretty interconnected. And I'd say this is one of the big ones that unites sort of the three different movements, is basically that they want their followers and their people in the movements to be passionate about this and to motivate other people to join them and spread awareness. I mean, if you're leading a movement that you hope to spread internationally or even just nationally, you need people that are really devoted to it. And I think it's meant to incorporate people beyond just an emotional level, but seek to bring in the passion to like a political and a bigger scale. Because tons of people can sit around and talk about, oh, I wish we were more environmentally friendly, or we, looked at carbon emissions, but you really have to drive it so you can get that change, which I think leads into the final point, which is rupture. I'll pass on to Winifred.
Yeah, that's right. And so the idea here is that our straight line trajectory, our civilization, our species, is that we're actually headed towards extinction. That's the idea of Extinction Rebellion, that we are over consuming the resources of the earth and threatening the biodiversity of the earth and introducing climate change. And all of these things will actually lead to our civilization collapsing. And lots of civilizations have collapsed by destroying their environment, and we don't want the present world civilization to do the same. And lots of species have gone extinct because of changing climates, and we certainly don't want that. So the idea of rupture is that we need to have a break in this trajectory, and we need to change the way that we are approaching the planet. And so that also connects in with some of the protest tactics, that the big enemy is human complacency and the tendency to just go on with business as usual. And so the solution is to try, as a movement, the environmental movement, to introduce a break in that thinking and really get people to realize we do need to change what we're doing. It's actually not okay what we're doing. I guess when I think about this chapter as a whole, I really enjoyed it. I haven't thought about the relationship of the environmental movement to democracy and the new kinds of democracies that they're imagining. This was a very fresh chapter for me as a social psychologist who studies the environment movement. I've often focused at a more micro level. So looking at how this psychology or imaginaries, as it's called in this field, of how people look at democracy, I just really enjoyed it. What did you guys take from the chapter? Austin?
I think it was very fascinating to look at other perspectives on environmental movements. I mean, in my generation, I was going to school when Greta Thunberg sort of gave her famous
Yeah.
speech to the United Nations. And I remember doing the climate strike on Friday and
Yeah.
like not going to school and everything. And I was like, oh, this is a good idea, but I wonder what else we could do to potentially, again, we're talking about passion and rupture again, get it into the
Yeah.
political system and get people to think about it. And looking at maybe extreme, like I think it was Earth First, the ones who were doing full on sabotaging, and the other one, it's quite almost liberating to an extent. You get to see a bit more to the picture, and you're like, well, if you don't like doing that, you can do this. And there are tons of ways people can get involved to help.
Yeah. The real diversity as well that you're
Yeah.
talking about. Yeah.
Yeah.
And Yuki, what do you reckon?
Yeah, I think this, like, the chapter has really tells me like what something that I've never heard before about specifically what groups or like and how they make the movement. And what I learned from this is that like we really need to consider about how can we like become nonviolent to be persuasive to these policymakers to like stop them to pollute it, and also to help them to help the people, especially those passionate on the environmental people, like to protect the environment, but use a proper way. Yeah. And I think that's what we should do and think more about this like new form of democracy. Yeah.
Yeah. Really fun.
Yeah.
Well,
Thank you so much.
thank you both for participating in the recording. And I will close by saying thank you to our viewers for joining us today. Bye now.
Bye.
Bye. For those of you watching, be sure to subscribe and follow us at Social Change UQ, and check out our website for more videos.